They walked for 3 days through a landscape that was forgetting how to speak. WuDon felt it in the silence that trailed them north, not the dramatic silence of the grove of whispers going dark, but a subtler dying. The background hum that every Tindana learned to live with, the constant low-frequency murmur of root lines carrying ancestral voices from grove to grove, was thinning. On the first day, she could still feel the chorus beneath her feet as they followed the footpath through the Guinea savanna scattered notes, like the last singers leaving a funeral, their voices growing faint but not yet gone. By the second day, she could count individual signals where there should have been a multitude. And by the third morning, waking on hard ground with her pack for a pillow and the amber fruit pulsing warm against her spine, there were stretches of an hour or more where the network went completely quiet and the earth beneath her bare feet felt like dead weight, like walking on bone. She noticed other things. The soil changed. The rich red laterite of home gave way to a paler clay that crumbled when she pressed it between her fingers, chalky and dry, smelling of nothing. WuDon had grown up reading earth the way her literate cousins read books. Color told you iron content, texture told you water history, smell told you what lived below. This soil had no story. It had been leached of something fundamental, drained from beneath, and what remained was husk. The trees thinned. Shea and baobab gave way to scrubby acacias that looked parched even by Harmattan standards, their leaves curled tight as fists, their bark flaking in strips that littered the path like shed skin. No birds nested in them. No insects hummed around their flowers because there were no flowers. Even the grasses, which should have been golden brown and hip-high in the dry season, grew sparse and brittle, snapping under her feet with the sound of small bones breaking. Sunyani walked ahead, silent and grim. He carried his petrified staff and leaned on it more than she had ever seen him lean on anything. The deep broadcast had taken something from him. His skin had not recovered its color, a persistent gray underlay the brown, visible at the temples and in the hollows of his cheeks, and his breathing carried a rasp that had not been there before. He ate little of the TZ she unwrapped at rest stops, chewing mechanically, washing the mouthfuls down with water from his gourd without tasting. She caught him pressing his palm to the earth during their second night's rest, testing the root lines, and saw him pull away as though he had touched something cold. "Laffy," she asked him on the second morning, kneeling beside the ashes of their small fire, pressing another ball of TZ into a plantain leaf for the day's walk.
He looked at her, and the effort it took him to smile was answer enough. "Laffy,"
he said. The word had never sounded so much like a lie. On the third afternoon, the acacias stopped. The path opened onto a low ridge, and below them the landscape changed so completely that WuDon's feet stopped moving before her mind caught up. The grove of Sunyani. She had expected death. Blackened trees, scorched earth, the visual evidence of a grove consumed by whatever was eating the network from below. What she found was not death, it was transfiguration. The trees had crystallized. Every tree in the grove baobabs wide as houses, slender shea trees, undergrowth and ground cover and climbing vines had been transformed. Not killed, not petrified, crystallized. Their trunks were translucent, glowing from within with a soft amber light that matched the fruit's pulse against WuDon's back. Their leaves had become glass-thin sheets of the same crystal, trembling in the afternoon breeze with a sound that stopped her heart. Wind chimes. But not wind chimes made by hands. Wind chimes made by intention. Each leaf tuned to a note that harmonized with its neighbors. The whole canopy singing a chord so pure it hurt to hear, because it was beautiful beyond the body's capacity for beauty. Their roots visible now, rising from the soil in ridges that pulsed with light, were no longer wood. They were the root lines themselves, lifted from their underground architecture and displayed on the surface like the veins of a body that had turned transparent. The entire grove was a living diagram of the network she had only ever felt in communion, made visible, made touchable, made real.
The warmth hit her next, not the dry heat of the savannah, but a humid mineral warmth that rose from the crystallized ground like breath from an open mouth. It carried a smell: deep earth, wet stone, the metallic tang of groundwater meeting iron-rich rock far below the surface, and beneath that, something sweeter, like shea butter warming in a clay pot, like the smell of her grandmother's hands after a morning spent grinding millet, familiar and ancient at once. And WuDon breathed it in until her lungs ached, because it was the first thing that had smelled alive in 2 days of walking through dead country. "You're not."
Sunyani breathed. The words were not prayer. They were involuntary, the sound a man makes when the world exceeds what his training prepared him for. He had stopped at the grove's edge, his petrified staff planted in the earth, his face reflecting the amber glow.
"They are not just waking, they are surfacing.
The Zagale.
This is what they make." He touched the nearest crystallized trunk. His hand trembled, and she could not tell if it was from the broadcast's toll or from awe. The crystal was warm under his palm. She could see it in the way his fingers relaxed against the surface, the involuntary easing of a body encountering comfort in an alien place. The Zagale are the system, WuDon. They do not use the root lines. They are the root lines. When they surface, the medium transforms. Wood becomes crystal. Soil becomes circuit. The boundary between the guardians and the world they maintain dissolves.
WuDon stepped into the grove. The crystallized ground chimed beneath her bare feet each step, producing a clear, resonant tone that traveled through her ankles and into her shins and settled in her knees like the memory of dancing. The root lines pulsed in response to her footsteps, brightening where she walked, dimming behind her, as though the network were tracking her movement the way a sunflower tracks the sun. The light was amber gold, shifting as she moved, and it cast no shadows. Nothing in this grove cast shadows. The light came from everywhere and nowhere, from the crystal trees and the pulsing roots and the warm ground. And walking through it was like walking into the interior of a lantern, like being inside the light, rather than illuminated by it. She thought of the Catholic church in Bolgatanga, where her aunt had taken her once as a child, the colored glass windows throwing patterns on the stone floor, the hush, the sense of standing inside something sacred that was also somehow alive. This was that feeling magnified beyond recognition. This was a cathedral built not by hands, but by something that understood holiness the way roots understand soil, as the medium of existence, not its ornament. The sound, she had to stop and simply listen. The crystal leaves chimed in the breeze, yes, but beneath the chiming was another sound, lower, steadier, a harmonic that she felt more than heard. The root lines were humming, not the ancestral whisper she knew from communion. A deeper frequency, older, less like voice and more like the vibration of the earth's own spine. It resonated in her chest cavity. It made her teeth ache. It was magnificent. At the center of the grove, where the oldest tree should have stood, she found Nyariga. The exiled scholar sat cross-legged on the crystallized ground, palms flat against the glowing surface, eyes closed. She was alive, her chest rose and fell with the slow rhythm of deep communion. But she was changed. Her skin had taken on the translucent quality of the crystallized trees. Not glass, not stone, but something between human skin that had been soaked in the same amber light until it became a window rather than a wall. Light moved beneath it, tracing paths that followed her veins, her tendons, the architecture of bone and muscle made visible the way the root lines had been made visible. Her hair, unbound and spread across her shoulders, caught the crystal's glow and split it into faint rainbow patterns that drifted across the ground around her like oil on water. WuDon's stomach turned and steadied and turned again. Beautiful, wrong, both at once, and neither word adequate. Nyariga's eyes opened.
They were amber. Not brown amber, not hazel, not any color that occurred in human faces. Crystal amber, the same amber as the fruit, the same amber as the grove. And they held a depth that human eyes should not hold, as though the space behind the iris extended not into a skull, but into the root line network itself. Miles of crystallized earth compressed into 2 points of living light. "You heard me," Nyarika said. Her voice was her own deeper, slower, carrying harmonics that vibrated in the crystallized ground and made the nearest root lines pulse brighter. The sound traveled through the earth as much as through the air, through the network. I did not think anyone could hear that deep anymore.
WuDon heard it. Sunyani said from the grove's edge. He had not entered. "Not me, she heard you on the first night, before I broke the prohibition."
Nyarika's crystal eyes found WuDon, and the attention was physical warmth on the skin, gentle pressure, as if being seen by those eyes meant being touched by the earth communion itself. WuDon held the gaze. She would not flinch from this. Her grandmother Apoka had looked at her with that same quality of seeing the look of a woman reading a person the way a Tindana reads soil, all the way down. "You have the gift," Nyarika said. "The depth. I had it too once, before I went deeper than the gift could follow, and the gift became something else."
She looked down at her translucent hands. The light traced her finger bones.
"The communion does not stop, child. If you go deep enough, it becomes permanent. You do not return to the surface unchanged."
"What happened to you?" WuDon asked, not with horror, with the calm, direct curiosity that Sunyani had trained into her and her grandmother had bred into her before that. "You looked at the wound before you treated it. You tasted the herb before you prescribed it."
"I opened the sealed node beneath this grove. 3 years ago." Nyarika's crystal eyes dimmed briefly, not sadness, but the weight of memory pressing against the medium of her transformed body. "I pushed through the geological barrier and found the Zagale's chamber, a space where the root lines converged at their deepest point, maintained by a guardian who had been asleep for longer than I have any measure for."
She paused.
"The guardian was dying. Not from age. The Zagale do not age as we understand it. Dying because the system it maintained was being poisoned from above. The corruption entering the root lines through the enskinment was reaching the deepest nodes, and the guardian could not filter it alone."
"So you helped?"
"I joined the communion permanently."
She said it the way WuDon's mother said she had married her father, a fact that had reshaped everything. Spoken without drama, because the reshaping was drama enough.
"I connected my awareness to the guardian's filtering process and added my depth to its capacity. The price was this."
She gestured at herself, at the crystal eyes and translucent skin, and the way the grove's light pulsed in time with her breathing.
"I can feel every node in the network, every grove, every root line. I can feel the corruption entering from the surface, and I can feel the Zagale straining to contain it."
"And the guardians."
Sunyani's voice from the edge, rough with something WuDon recognized as guilt.
"Awake, fully awake, for the first time in millennia. The corruption has become too intense for sleep."
Nyarika looked at WuDon.
"It wants to speak with you."
WuDon's heart kicked against her ribs. "With me?"
"It has been calling for someone to hear it. I have been its voice in the network, but my communion is too deep now. I am part of the system, not a visitor. It needs someone who can descend far enough to hear, but is still rooted to the surface. Someone who can carry a message back up.
The crystal eyes held WuDon's with an intensity that was not pressure, but gravity, the pull of something important drawing her toward it.
You are the only living Tindana with the depth to reach the guardian and the humanity to return.
WuDon unslung her pack. She unwrapped the amber fruit from its nest of plantain leaves, and the grove responded. Every crystallized tree flared brighter. The root lines pulsed in a wave that radiated outward from where she stood, and the harmonic hum deepened, the earth's voice dropping into a register she felt in her hip bones and her jaw. The fruit in her hands blazed no longer merely warm but hot, almost too hot to hold, a concentrated point of the same frequency that ran through the entire transformed landscape.
Nyariga stared at it. For the first time since they arrived, her composure broke the controlled stillness of a woman who had spent 3 years as part of a living network cracking open to reveal the human underneath. Surprise, recognition, and then hope fierce, compressed, the kind of hope that has been held so tightly for so long it cuts the hands that finally release it. A communion key, she whispered. The system produced it. The root lines grew it through the grandfather tree as an invitation, a safe passage into the deep network. With this, you can descend to the guardian without losing yourself the way I did.
Her voice broke on the last words, and WuDon understood. Nyariga had not known, until this moment, that there was a way to do what she had done and come back.
It will anchor you to the surface. It will let you return.
WuDon looked at Samini. The old Tindana had entered the grove at last, standing 3 paces behind her, his petrified staff in his hand, and his gray face tight with an emotion she could read as clearly as her grandmother's moods. Love and terror in equal measure, fighting for control of a man who had already lost 1 student to this depth and was watching another prepare to follow. "It has to be me," she said.
I know.
And the grief in his voice told her everything about the cost of training someone extraordinary in a world that consumed its extraordinary people. WuDon sat at the center of the crystallized grove. She placed the fruit on the ground before her. She pressed her palms to the crystal surface and felt the root lines beneath, not beneath, around. The network was everywhere here, exposed, alive, and she could feel it in its totality. 47 nodes, 43 still dimly lit, 4 dark, and below them all, the sealed layer where the Zagale waited. As she picked up the fruit, she bit into it. The taste flooded her mouth, and she gasped sweet and mineral and electric, copper and honey, and the deep iron tang of laterite dissolved in something that was not water but light. It tasted the way the root lines felt in communion, layered, ancient, alive. It tasted like the earth's blood. It filled her throat and her chest and her awareness with a frequency so pure it was not a sound but a direction. Down. The crystal surface beneath her palms softened. Not shattered, softened, opening like water around a sinking stone, and WuDon fell through the earth the way the fruit's frequency had promised she would. Slowly, held, wrapped in amber light that clung to her skin like warm water. She fell through soil that parted for her, through stone that opened its grain, through root lines that blazed as she passed, each one singing a note of recognition, through the sealed layer that Nyariga had forced her way through with raw communion pressure, but the fruit was a key. And for WuDon, the seal opened like a door. Her nose began to bleed. The pressure built in her ears until she heard a high whine like a struck bell, and her hands burned where they had pressed the crystal, and a headache drove behind her eyes with the weight of depth itself. The fruit's warmth in her chest fought the cold of the deep earth, and she held to it the way a swimmer holds to a breath, her body's anchor to the surface, the thread that would pull her back. The chamber opened around her. Vast, amber-lit from every surface. The walls were not walls but crystallized root lines woven so densely they formed a structure, a cathedral beneath the earth, and the air inside was warm and mineral-smelling, the scent of deep stone and ancient water, and WuDon breathed it in and tasted copper and soil on her tongue. In the center, a figure. Not human, not crystal. Something that existed in the space between, a being whose form shifted the way firelight shifts, now a shape she almost recognized, now a geometry that had no name, now a presence so vast it exceeded the chamber and extended through every root line in the network simultaneously. It was enormous not in the way a mountain is enormous, but in the way a silence is enormous when it contains the memory of every sound that has ever been made and forgotten. A Zagale, an architect. A guardian who had been sleeping since before the Tindana tradition had a name and was now awake and was looking at WuDon with an attention that pressed against her skin like warm hands. It spoke. Not in words. The message arrived the way deep communion arrived through the body, bypassing the ears and the mind and landing in the bones. She felt it in her ribs and her spine and the small bones of her feet. She felt it in the root lines that still connected her to the surface through the fruit's amber thread. She felt it the way she felt weather changing not as information, but as physical truth, undeniable, arriving in the body before the mind could argue. The cage is breaking. Something sealed long ago, sealed by the Zagale themselves, sealed at a cost they are still paying. Breaking now because the corruption from the surface has weakened the locks. The thief, a presence in the network that should not be there, wearing the root lines like stolen clothing, taking the shape of the system to move undetected. A man with half a face made of obsidian, weaving himself into the architecture the Zagale had built, intending not to destroy it but to replace it, to become it, to wear the earth's voice as his own. And the alignment. Damba, the cosmic alignment that the festival celebrated, when the connections between surface and depth thinned to nothing and the sealed nodes could be opened or sealed anew. 4 days away. Bring the rejected one. Bring Nyariga. Not to heal her, she was past healing in the ordinary sense, but because she was part of the system now, and the system needed every part of itself present when the cage was resealed or broken forever. Bring the pattern, the communion key, the fruit that the network had grown as its last act of volition before the thief's corruption silenced the grandfather tree. The cage breaks at Damba. The message ended. Not faded ended, the way a hand releases a grip. WuDon floated in amber light, held by the fruit's frequency, connected to the guardian and the surface and the network and every node in the system simultaneously. Her nose bled freely. Her ears rang. The headache was a living thing behind her eyes. The fruit's warmth in her chest burned not dangerously, not destructively, but with the fierce insistence of something that was keeping her alive, in a place where life was not the default state. She understood, not everything, not the specifics, not the plan, but the shape of what was happening, 4 stories converging, 4 fragments of a crisis that would resolve at Damba or not at all, and a deadline that was now 4 days away and counting down with the patient, implacable rhythm of the guardian's ancient heart. She reached for the surface. The amber light wrapped around her, lifted her, carried her upward through stone and root and soil. She rose through the sealed layer and the root lines and the crystallized earth and broke through the grove's floor gasping, bleeding, shaking, her hands burning and her vision blurred, and the taste of copper and earth filling her mouth. Samini caught her, his arms around her shoulders, his hands on her face, his voice saying her name. Nyariga's crystal eyes watching from across the grove, already knowing, already grieving, already preparing. The cage breaks at Damba, WuDon said. Her voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Blood from her nose dripped onto the crystallized ground and the ground absorbed it, pulsing once, amber, before going still. 4 days, he said, bring the rejected one, bring the pattern. She looked at Nyariga. He means you.
Nyariga closed her eyes. When she opened them, They were brighter than before 2 points of amber light in a face that was no longer entirely a face, that had crossed far enough from human to be something the language had not yet named. "Then we go," Nyariga said. Her voice harmonized with the crystal ground, with the humming root lines, with the deep chord of the Zagale's chamber far below. "All of us, before the cage breaks and the thief walks free wearing the earth's stolen voice."
WuDon pressed her bleeding palms to the warm crystal. The grove sang around her wind chimes and harmonics and the deep hum of something ancient preparing for a fight it had been putting off for millennia. The fruit pulsed against her chest. The root lines pulsed beneath her hands. The guardian pulsed in the deep earth, awake and afraid and counting the hours until Damba. 4 days, 3 travelers, one network dying node by node. And somewhere in the dark spaces between the root lines, a thief with half a face made of obsidian, listening to everything they said, wearing the earth like a mask, smiling with a mouth that was not his own.